In early 2016, as his first serious race for the presidency was building steam, Donald Trump held a fundraiser for veterans that he claimed brought in $6 million in a single hour. David Fahrenthold, a reporter for the Washington Post, got curious about how much of that money really made it to veterans' charities. So he started calling them up and asking. The final tally? Only half of that amount actually reached the groups. Fahrenthold later won the Pulitzer for the work he would go on to do that year, exposing just how much of Trump's supposed charitable giving throughout his life was an illusion. And today, he's doing similar work at the New York Times, tracking down receipts for DOGE's claims about the money it saved across the federal government. But, we know all this now, right? All these things that once felt like shocking revelations, they're just so not surprising anymore. And worse, it seems like the current administration doesn't even really care that much. So far in Trump's second term, we know he's accepted an airplane from a foreign government, and we know he's enriched himself with a grifty meme coin. No investigative reporting required. So I wanted to ask Fahrenthold how he keeps up the faith in times like these, and why he thinks investigative reporting still matters. And good news, he's not nearly as cynical as I am. Oh, David, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Okay, you technically cover nonprofits, is the formal role you have, but clearly you specialize in getting the receipts for how money moves. So you spent a lot of this year looking at DOGE. Do you think you can share just a little bit about what you've been discovering?
Yeah, what we've looked at is this thing called the Wall of Receipts, which is a website that DOGE set up in mid-February where they said, well, we'll show you all of the receipts. We'll see for everything we cut, we'll tell you what we cut, the contract we cut, and how much we saved by doing it. And we were interested in that because then, and sort of now too, DOGE was kind of this like mysterious, secretive organization. They had all this power, but they were almost like a movie monster. They would come to your organization and destroy it, or they would cut your job or cut your contract. But you never really saw their face. You didn't understand how they thought. You didn't really know who they were. And this wall of receipts, I think, was intended by them to just be sort of a hit list. Here are all the great things we did, the things we canceled. But it became this really unusual window into their thinking and the way they thought, the rigor they put behind their decisions, the kinds of things they were willing to put up with and they weren't. And so we began to use it like that, sort of as a way into DOGE and its thought process. And that started right away. The first day that they put up the wall of receipts, the folks on the Upshot team here at the Times realized that the biggest entry on the list, this $8 billion savings from a cut at DHS, was wrong, and wrong by a factor of 1,000. It was only 8 million instead of 8 billion. And that got us started on thinking, okay, well, if they would post this thing with the biggest thing on it that wrong, what else is wrong? And we started digging into it and really learned a lot about the organization by mapping its mistakes.
Right. So it's interesting because you sort of are talking about the second level of what you were able to learn from this. But even before then, you guys were just finding out that the numbers didn't add up. I think you kind of smartly just sorted the list by biggest number and started going down to see if they were accurate or not.
That's exactly what we did. We turned their list into a spreadsheet. We sorted it by the biggest savings first. And everything, the top five, I think even more than top five, were all wrong. One was 8 billion instead of 8 million. One was the same contract counted 3 times. One was a contract where they counted the whole thing when really they'd only cut a little bit of it. One had been canceled actually under Joe Biden, so it wasn't there doing it all. Just going down that list, the biggest ones at that time were all wrong.
And that's a good example of something that they probably didn't count on somebody. I don't know, actually. I wonder if they did.
I wonder that too.
Do you think they counted on somebody to do that kind of math behind them?
How could you not, right? This was not something that I found or got from a source. Like, this wasn't any great feat of reporting by me. They put it out there. And all we did was download it and sort it and call the vendors whose contracts it was. And again, these were not really, we didn't need secret documents. We didn't need secret sources. You could just go look. Sometimes you could just click on the link that DOGE provided and see that what DOGE was saying was wrong.
So you've alluded to these sort of second order lessons you were able to extract. What did you find out about what DOGE was about from this?
Well, we learned, first of all, that they didn't really seem to have any quality control. When these numbers came in from agencies, whatever, identifying the things they had cut, it didn't seem like they said somebody was checking these and making sure they were good before they put them on the wall of receipts. But There were things that one, a 5-second glance would tell you they were wrong. A couple of them, the completion date for the contract was 2005. If you saw that, how could you put that on a list of things you killed in 2025? And other ones, where they counted the same contract twice, you'd think you'd ask questions about that. Also surprising was, in an indication of their lack of quality control, was that a huge portion of the contracts, something like 40% or more, they said, according to DOGE's own math, saved nothing, zero. There were zero savings cuts. And so what's the point of this exercise if the things you're cutting don't save any money at all, if this giant percentage of them don't save any money at all? So you see in that what appeared to be this sense of carelessness, that they didn't know what they were cutting, or that they weren't looking carefully enough to even understand it. They were just putting the stuff up there without looking at it all. And given how much money, how many people, how much of the U.S. government wasn't dependent on the decisions made by this group, and that their argument was basically, we're smarter than everybody else and we can make decisions that nobody else is smart enough to make. How do those things, the power and that claim of intelligence, square with this, what looks like sloppiness?
Well, I guess it also raises the question of, was this a ruthless but maybe overzealous or sloppy but genuine effort to cut costs, or was it a political exercise to show you're doing major cost cutting without really caring if it mattered or not?
It's a good question, and we're working on some stories now to try to get inside their minds. Like, what were they thinking? Why did they do it this way? But certainly they were trying to make their cuts seem big. They had this website that was trying to show progress toward Elon Musk was saying at the time was going to be $1 trillion in cuts. So there was an incentive politically for them to make their cuts seem really big. In fact, a lot of there's a limit to what we can fact check on that page, because a huge percentage of the number they claim, the top line number, which is now $180 billion in savings, is just not accounted for at all. Even though this is called the wall of receipts, there are no receipts for like half or more of that claim. So that part you have to just take on faith. But to look down that list and see how many of these really big, the biggest contracts had these problems, you just have to wonder, what would be your motivation if you're doing this thing so people can check into it? What's your motivation for getting it that wrong? And who would tolerate that? Who would tolerate, both within DOGE and outside of DOGE, who would tolerate that level of error again and again and again?
What's the status of DOGE now, given that Musk has left, and it has this feeling, at least from the outside, that it sort of has crumbled or stalled? Is that right?
Well, their claims about what they're cutting have slowed down greatly. And yes, Musk is gone. There are still some people from DOGE within these agencies. DOGE itself officially still exists. And you do read about their impact, but I think their impact now is mainly on things going forward. They've put a lot of restrictions in, and they still have a role in approving new contracts. So there's been things about, the Washington Post had a good story about how they blocked a new ICE, the immigrant detention facility, because of contract concerns. So I think they still do have impact on approving and stopping future government spending, but the thing that they were supposed to do, like slashing the government, reducing the contracts that were already out there, that momentum really seems to have slowed down.
The idea was, there's all of this fat that's just sitting out there, and we'll just walk in the door and we'll see it as soon as we walk in, and it'll be super easy. That exercise may have come under some reconsideration now.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to people who care a lot about cutting the government, making the government cheaper, I think this is an immensely frustrating moment, even though Musk was theoretically their ally, because they promised people the moon. They said, if you just look anywhere, you'll just find giant piles of waste and fraud. It'll be so easy to cut this. And that was never going to be the case, right? The government, there is waste, there is fraud, there is fat, but it's not just laying around there for any idiot to find. It's hard to find. And sort of that was I thought the value proposition of DOGE was that they were the ones who were smart enough to find things nobody else could. But the way they went after it, the way they tried to sort of do it themselves and not listen to anybody else's advice, meant that they made no more progress than anyone else ever had, and certainly didn't put in the time to find the hidden fat and waste and fraud, which is what those folks who want the government to be smaller, they say basically there was this moment to really shrink the government and do it in a way that was smart, and it just seems like it was squandered.
I have to say that the way this whole thing ended, and then especially with the almost comical blow up between Musk and Trump, struck me as someone who's watched now, 10 years of Trump doing this, as kind of predictable. Like we could have predicted that Musk and Trump would have a blow up, and just like we can kind of predict that at some point they're going to be standing together in the Oval Office, shaking hands and doing something again, right? This is a pattern that we are now familiar with. And I wonder if there is this kind of familiarity fatigue that you wrestle with in your reporting. Do you find that people sort of look at the stuff you're putting out, and it's very different than when it was in 2016.
Yeah.
You find that people look at it and say, yeah. I mean, okay, sure, whatever. We know all this.
Oh, so certainly I worry about that. And I worry about it from two directions. You worry about it from just, regular readers who aren't that political but want to stay on top of what's happening in Washington, getting fatigued because there's so much that happens in both Trump administrations that just doesn't go anywhere, that people get so wound up about. I mean, there's been a million of those things so far in this administration. Think about turning Alcatraz into, reopening Alcatraz as a prison, Greenland. There's all these things that sort of come and go that people get wound up about that don't go anywhere. So it's hard if you're someone who's trying to consume the news but also live your life doing something else. It's hard for you to know what's important enough to really pay attention. That's one problem. The other problem I have is that very liberal readers who are very engaged in the news, often have this sense about Trump, this that they already know. Whatever you're telling them, even if you're telling them something for the first time, even if you're the first to report it, in their mind, they already knew it was true. And they want you to be 20 steps beyond. I'm writing that Trump is steering this business to this federal contract to one of his buddies or something like that. And they say, yeah, I knew that. Write about this other outlandish conspiracy theory that they believe to be true. So to them, even the news is not new because they are, in their mind, they believe that and much worse.
Is it like a Mandela effect where they think that this specific thing has already been reported or is it more of a blanket, listen, we understand this about Trump, so I don't need to keep hearing about it with different, proper nouns?
That's a good question. I think it is the Mandela effect, honestly, that people have this sense that they've read somewhere or, which they probably did read it somewhere. Not the New York Times, that this thing and much worse.
Maybe not reported, right? Maybe speculated on, but
somebody speculated.
Right.
But they really want you to report this other thing somebody speculated on that's further down the conspiracy rabbit hole.
Right.
But yeah, for me, I think it's important. It's a little easier for me now as an investigative reporter to like not just write about what Trump says. What Trump says is important. Obviously, he's the president. But what is enduring is what of the many things that he says actually becomes policy, becomes something that is acted on, and then to try to judge that on its own merits, rather than looking to Trump as, it's the only source of what's going to happen and also the only source of whether something that he did is a success or not. He'll tell you everything he did is a success. Can we look for ways to measure independently of him, give people something more concrete to hang on to? Because if all you do is care about what he says, it's this constantly changing, his opinions about the same thing will vary, 5 times in the same day. To try to give people something sort of independent that's once you found it stays found, rather than something that's just his rhetoric.
I mean, I guess we're talking right now about the readership, right? The audience, and on some level, this was the strategy. I remember Steve Bannon saying that this was explicitly the strategy to flood the zone, to exhaust people. This is sort of the Trump approach in a lot of ways. But I'm also wondering, from your point of view, from an investigative reporter point of view, if it feels like any of it matters as far as the targets of the investigations. Do the Trump people care? And another way of putting it is, does the system function in the way I think we probably all took for granted even 10 years ago, that if you publish this thing that is exposing a significant dishonesty, it will have political consequences, and therefore it matters to the people who you're exposing it about. And I don't know if that's true anymore.
Yeah, I think that expectation of you write something damaging about somebody in either party, and then your job as a reporter is just to start the chain reaction, and then there'll be hearings and there'll be consequences from within the party, and there'll be this string of other news stories that provide accountability and provide more things for you to cover. That I don't think you can count on happening in anywhere near the same way that it used to. But that is not just a creature of Trump. That's been eroding for a long time. This partisanship, I think we were sort of imprinted. I got into journalism in 2000, and you're sort of imprinted on the era even before that, the Iran-Contra era, Watergate, where there were hearings where one party would hold its own leaders to task, and so the fact that you revealed wrongdoing might set off something independent of you. You can't count on that anymore. But I don't think that's to say that readers don't care about it and don't want to read about it. My way of dealing with both that lack of sort of accountability mechanisms and also general overwhelmed nature of our readers and the fire hose of news they're dealing with is to break stories into little pieces, to write about the same story again and again and again in bite-sized pieces rather than just one big thing. both because that you can reach more tipsters that way, you can bring in more news, but also because you're trying to catch readers when they're ready for it, right? If I write about this 10 times, one of these times might be the time that you're actually interested, and you'll grab onto that, and you'll read all my other stories before this and after that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been my way of dealing with this, is not just dropping some huge story and then getting frustrated when there's not a congressional subcommittee and panel to deal with whatever I wrote about.
Am I being too cynical here? I mean, I'm conscious of that, but I mean, we can just straight up compare. DOGE isn't quite the bombshell level, but I mean, in 2016, when you did this reporting on Trump's donations, charitable giving, and what really was going on there, that felt to me, when that came out, like a bombshell. That felt like, oh my gosh, like this is a huge exposure of who this person really is. Of course, we know it didn't prevent him from winning the nomination and the presidency. But I mean, that must have. Do you feel a difference between when you put a story out now about Trump specifically and then?
That's a good question. The current environment is different. I mean, if only because then he was just a candidate. And so, like, there was reporting about what his policies were. But, you know, A, he wasn't in power then, and B, there was still this sense that, like, oh, he's not going to do half of the things he said, which was kind of true in the first administration, actually. But, you know, there was, as crowded and crazy as the 2016 news cycle felt like, it actually was less crowded than now, where not only is there the things we're writing about what's happening behind the scenes, but what's happening in front of the scenes. What, you know, what's happening on the main stage of American politics is a lot. DOGE, immigration protests, all these different really radical moves that are changing precedents that have held sway in Washington for a long time. So it is more crowded. But I think the thing that is true then and now is that people really are tired of news that is just what a politician says, and they really respond well to something that's more concrete, to something that says, here's how this politician behind the scenes used money. Here's something that's concrete that I can show you that is a decision this person made when they thought nobody was watching. You know, that was true of the Trump charity coverage. It's true of DOGE now. People really do respond to that because they understand it's something that's a little more revealing about, rather than just looking at the words these politicians say.
It's true, but it's also like they're also doing it right out in the open, right? They're taking the plane from Qatar. They're doing the meme coin, right?
Yeah.
The sort of grifty thing that, at least in 2016, and I think the charity thing is a great example, they were trying to obscure what was happening there. That's just happening. They're just saying, here, this is how we do things.
It is a different environment. Me and even more of my colleagues here in Washington have written a lot about this sort of acceptance of, like, we're just going to make money off the president.
Yeah.
The Trump family, you know, we're going to use our power to get our private businesses, you know, permits approved in Vietnam and Israel and Serbia and other places. So there is more of an openness to just monetizing the influence of the presidency. But I guess that what I want to make clear to people is that there's still a lot they're hiding. There's still a lot that's happening behind the scenes. And a good example of that would be this crypto dinner that happened at Trump's golf club a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. You know, it was open that he was having this dinner for people who were, you know, big investors in this coin that he made a lot of money off of. But they didn't tell us who the investors were. Our reporter went and took a snapshot of the guest list, and then we figured it out. You know, so that was in the open in some ways, but the real details, which was like who was paying Trump, that wasn't public until we revealed it. So there still is a lot they're hiding.
I don't want to make this just like, oh, Trump is this guy who's doing all these things on his own, because I think he's part of a system right now that exists. And I do wonder if you think that the norms that are being set are norms we're going to have to live with, and this relationship between journalism and the people we cover, that maybe we're never going to have the kind of impact in terms of you expose a thing and there's going to be a congressional hearing that's going to actually, I mean, the church committee, right, actually like dug up things that we didn't even know at the time, right? There was a genuine sense of shock. And now it seems like any political party on both sides just knows they can weather whatever storm and move on. And I wonder if we'll ever get back to that time, or if we completely have to recalibrate our relationship as reporters and what we're doing.
Well, I think, you know, there's so many ways the time that I came into journalism, there were all these things that we took for granted that were like just bedrocks of life, you know, laws of the universe that were actually just like, we happen to be living in a fluky time. I mean, one, for me, means a lot to me personally, was the business model of newspapers, which seemed incredibly strong when I joined and then was not. But the other one was, this sense that there was a bipartisan accountability in Washington, which had not really been the norm for most of American history, but was then. I do think that it's not going to come back in the same way. I mean, one example on the other side is when last year, all these, you know, when Joe Biden was according to Jake Tapper's book, struggling with old age and other problems, there was not a sense from Democrats. In fact, there was the opposite, to try to reveal that and maybe move on, even if they thought it was in the best interest of the country.
Or to this day, a sense that there should be true accountability, right? There's a political kind of battle about the book itself, but there's not really a sense of, we need a real truth and reconciliation about what went on here, whatever it turns up.
I mean, yeah, we spent all last year with the Democrats saying this is an existential election. Trump's going to come in and do all these authoritarian things, which maybe they were right about, but they weren't acting like that was true, right? They were saying all that, but then on their own side, not taking any of the steps that you think would be triggered if you believe something that serious was at stake and that your candidate was, flawed in these ways and losing in the polls. So yes, anyway, I do think that we may just be in an era where there's less accountability and that there's more sort of a parliamentary system where it's all one party or all the other party. But I think that what readers want out of us is not changed. And I don't think we should mistake a lack of response in Washington or a lack of accountability in Washington for a lack of interest from readers. I mean, one example of that was that they didn't vote for the Democrats. I mean, people were it wasn't like they were so blinded by, the lack of accountability from within the Democratic Party that they didn't see what was going on and didn't respond at the polls.
All right, I appreciate your optimism here. I think to the extent that that's what that could be called. I think you're very kindly rejecting my thesis that there's no point anymore, which isn't really quite my view, but it sometimes feels like I worry that some of the things we take for granted just don't land in the way that they did before.
I just think you have to really remember in times like this that there's different jobs in the world of American life, right? And my job is not to foment opposition to Donald Trump or to organize people against Donald Trump or to help elect Democrats or any of the other things that are would be political responses to Trump. That I don't do that. That's not my job, and I can't think about like the lack of that, the lack of an effective political response to Trump or the lack of accountability from some institution for Trump, or a political response to what I'm writing about. You can't think of that as like, oh, well, I failed or there's something wrong with me or my, what I'm doing, or I should change my strategy or give up hope because that's not happening. That's like just, that's somebody else's job in some other sphere of life, and I don't deal with it. But people do really care about the stuff that I'm doing, and they read it. And like the thing that I have, and it's a big enough job, is to figure these things out, write about them in a way that people can understand, and then what happens beyond that is beyond me.
It's a very earnest and I think correct interpretation of this job, and it's good because cynicism is our kryptonite. Really, we're in big trouble.
Yeah,
otherwise.
Absolutely.
Every presidency, I think, brings with it interesting, specific sort of skills and backgrounds that you need to do the reporting into it. This one has been a really, really a lot of crypto, a lot of tech stuff. I'm curious who else you've seen out there who's been doing really good reporting, if you're allowed to answer this question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so DOGE is the part of this that I know best, and there's been a number of outlets that have done a really good job, but I think Hannah Nathanson and other folks at the Washington Post, my old newspaper, have done an amazing job writing about all aspects of DOGE, but especially the aspects of like what DOGE is now and going forward. Wired has done really good work on what DOGE is doing inside federal computer systems. Notice, NOTUS, a news site that I had never heard of before, has done some great stuff on DOGE as well. So there is really good work, and I think it's paying off. I think people really respond to those things.
And how about you? Like I said in the beginning, you're technically the nonprofits guy. Trump has landed in your lap and not gotten up, but are there other things you're hoping to dig into over the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, I do love writing about nonprofits, and I would like to go back to writing about them at some point. And this stuff has just been too much fun, and it's just fascinating. I think that being able to see inside this kind of faceless, secretive monster that people saw in DOGE, like being able to see inside this secretive group and understand how they're thinking, is just fascinating. So yeah, I'll keep doing that as long as they'll let me. But yes, I think eventually I will get to go back to reporting about nonprofits, which is also fantastic. And maybe someday about a nonprofit that isn't tied into American politics in one way or another.
David, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
The Kicker is brought to you by the Columbia Journalism Review and produced by Amanda Dara. I'm your host, Josh Hirsch.